Paul in chapter 2 has just been describing the recent history of his Gentile audience. Once they were dead in trespasses and sins, although in verse 3 he affirms that the Jews were just as lost as the Gentiles, by nature children of wrath. In verse 5 he writes that Jews and Gentiles were made alive together with Christ. He then, from verse 11 onwards, moves from the ostracism from God that both Jew and Gentile experienced to the particular alienation that the Gentiles experienced, as they were uncircumcised, strangers to the covenant and promises, and indeed a wall even separated them. But Christ has broken down the wall, abolished the law, and joined the two peoples together, adding Gentiles to the inheritance of Israel and constructing from them both a single holy temple. Having said all this, Paul now takes a more personal turn, showing how he fits into this incredible picture and how it has landed him in prison. He does not give us a clue as to where he is, and, as Dave said in the previous video, his location is traditionally understood to be Rome, as at the end of Acts. He was, of course, in prison in Caesarea before that, and so that is a possibility too. But references to imprisonments in 2 Corinthians 6:5 and 11:23 perhaps suggest numerous spells in chains. The letter known as 1 Clement says that the total was 7. Other letters written from a prison are Colossians, Philemon and 2 Timothy. This leads us to consider the question of why Paul is writing in the first place. Unlike his other letters, there is no clear reason for this missive. He does not refer to any particular problem, situation, question or dodgy teaching. No one is greeted and no particular households are referred to. Perhaps the only explicit rationale is given in 6:22, where he simply wants them to know how he and his companions are doing and to encourage the Ephesians. We know from Acts that he would revisit churches to strengthen them, and so perhaps he was sending out letters to various places. The letter sent to Colossae is quite similar to Ephesians, and he might have written them at the same time. But chapters 2 and 3 do seem to provide the focus for the letter, whether Paul is thinking of a particular problem he has heard about in Ephesus, or whether it is just something he routinely has to deal with. As the chosen apostle to the Gentiles, it is a matter obviously close to his heart. It is precisely as this chosen apostle that he suffers now for these Gentiles. His suffering is not pointless. It is part of his commission from Christ. It is in service of this mystery that was hidden for ages past, but now revealed to Paul personally, but also to the apostles and holy prophets. Paul can single himself out at one moment as he tells his story, but when he refers to the grand scheme, he is merely part of that privileged group on which, as he wrote in 2:20, the household of God is constructed. When describing such incredible things, it is not surprising that Paul describes himself in verse 8 as the very least of all the saints. If they know his story, they know what he is referring to. Paul obviously really enjoys reflecting on all the wonders of the wisdom of God, for they constantly provide him with rich contrasts. Here he is, a chosen herald of this mystery, part of the foundation of the church itself, but he is a prisoner in chains, a servant or slave, and the very last one you could think would deserve the privilege of such a revelation. But all these experiences and thoughts have shown him the true inner power of the gospel, that it is a power of reversals, reversing death into life, condemnation into justification, making the stranger into a family member and an heir no less. All of this, as he writes in verse 11, has been carried out in Christ. This is the key, because God is not arbitrary. He did not institute the law only to throw it away. He did not make a covenant only to break it, or choose a people only to reject them, and then choose other people he had formerly rejected. Christ is the cornerstone, because in Christ, by his atoning death on the cross, all these things are brought together, fulfilled, and resolved, and in doing so the mystery is now revealed, that God has been making a way back to him which will bring all the peoples of the earth, as originally promised to Abraham. This is why Paul now prays for the Gentiles from verse 14 onwards, so that they might understand and grow in these riches of grace, and live in the love of Christ and the power of God who raised him. He concludes in the final 2 verses with a doxology.